Hello, SYNGAP land. My name is Michael Graglia. This is episode 152 of SYNGAP10, the SYNGAP1 podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 22nd, and I'm only going to talk right now about the Coast2Coast Challenge. The Coast2Coast Challenge is the fundraiser we are running right now, and we are running it for the SYNGAP1 Promise for Clinical Excellence. Promise stands for Prospective, Multidisciplinary, Multi-Site Study for Clinical Excellence. Before I launch into this, let me get a few things understood. This is an important podcast, guys. That's one I want you to really listen to all the way through, both so that you hear it, but so you can use it to answer questions as you tell people about promise. So first principles, right? Genetic disease means a gene is broken. Our kids have SYNGAP1-Related Disorders. SYNGAP is the gene. It is broken in our kids. It is not inherited. Genetic doesn't mean inherited. Genetic means relating to a gene. Today, and this wasn't true a decade ago, but today you can say with a straight face, for this genetic disease, we can make a genetic therapy to fix that problem. I won't bore you with all the ways that you can use ASOs and AAVs to do cool stuff with genes, but you can. It's possible. And since it's possible, we can and should do it for our children. All right. Before this was possible, our kids were a go home and love them situation. That was it. Sorry, there's nothing we can do. It's genetic. That is no longer true. These therapies, important point, are delivered generally via spinal tap or directly to the brain, like drilling holes in skulls. Everything I'm going to talk about is probably going to be spinal tap. But before we can do that, regulators have to approve. All right? This is important things to just keep in mind. Our job as the SYNGAP Research Fund, as the patient advocacy group for patients with SYNGAP1, is to develop medicines and or to get industry to develop medicines. And this is happening right now. Take a look at our pipeline on our website, links in the show notes. We have to get regulators to approve these medicines before they can go into trials. And for these to go into trials, it's going to happen at major medical centers. It's going to happen at major academic medical centers. This is not something you do around the corner. This is not a drug you get from CVS and walk over to your doctor and say, shoot me up. This is something you go to a major medical center for. You have an entire team and you deliver cutting edge novel medicines via spinal tap, and then you monitor the patient for a while. What we're building on right now with SYNGAP Promise is an externally funded study at CHOP called END. So what happened is CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, one of the best medical institutions in the country, got a large grant, and they are launching a natural history study in combination with an effort to develop even more medicines for SYNGAP1. They got a large grant to focus on SYNGAP1, and we are building on that, okay? We are also building on an organization called RareX, which exists to, in a totally ethical and legal and globally compliant way, gather responses from patients and collect that data for the same end, to approve to understand patients and to help and support the approval of novel medicines, right? So RareX exists and is funded. CHOP exists and is funded. We are building on them. And we are also building on the work of giants who have gone before us. Stoke for Dravet syndrome, Praxis for SCN2A, Ionis for multiple rare diseases. All of those companies I just mentioned, by the way, are also working on SYNGAP1. And they have successfully taken drugs and stuck them into humans, the kind of drugs I'm talking about, right? So we're building on a lot of really incredible work, and we are right behind all these leaders. What we're asking for right now is for this community to help us raise at least $500,000 to fund a third site for Promise. Preferably, frankly, I'd like to raise $1.13 million. That will be the full ticket, which I'll talk about. But right now, by the end of the year, I would like to see us raise $500,000 for SYNGAP1 Promise for clinical excellence. I'm asking every family to make their largest gift ever to SRF, fundraise with friends and family. Now, you might have heard us talk about ACEs. ACEs was Accelerating Clinical Excellence for SYNGAP. We were very proud of ourselves. We thought that was a cool acronym. The neurologists went nuts. They were like, you cannot call it ACEs. And we were like, ACEs sounds really cool. And they were like, no, because ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Events. We didn't know this. So we renamed it Promise. So if you hear me say Promise, you're like, what happened to ACEs? ACEs is dead. Don't ever say that to a neurologist. We are talking right now about SYNGAP1 Promise for clinical excellence. Kind of a throwback. All right. There's 2 slides in the show notes. They talk about the master plan, and they give you a layout of all the different funding needs for Promise. But the thing I want you to keep in mind is we have 2 sites. We have CHOP, which is self-funded. We have Colorado Children's, which is funded by the SYNGAP Research Fund in partnership with a private foundation. Some very good people have funded Colorado. Thank you so much. You know who you are. And now we need to fund this 3rd site, $500,000. Okay, now Suzanne Jones and I have been talking to a few people and have been getting some questions. And we were just comparing notes this morning or last night, and we said, we got to answer these questions. And that's why I'm doing this episode. I want to share these answers with you so that you know exactly what's going on, and you too can answer these questions as you raise money for SYNGAP1 Promise for Clinical Excellence. Question 1, why now? Why does this have to happen right now? Why are we going from bench, from scientific research to bedside clinical science right now? What's going on? Well, first of all, when SRF started 6 years ago, there were exactly 0 companies working on SYNGAP1, 0. About a year later, Stoke announced they were working on, and then Praxis, and then it just kept coming. Right now, if you go to our pipeline, available on our website, you will find at least 10 companies working on SYNGAP1, not to mention the small molecule efforts. Number 2, we really are tapped out. SRF raises money and we spend it. We raise it, we spend it. We've been funding an incredible amount of very cool science, a lot of missense work, et cetera, et cetera. It's time now to focus on the clinical, and we are prioritizing that, which is why we need the whole community to rally behind Promise and help us raise at least $500,000. Also, the clock is ticking over at CHOP. CHOP has a 5-year grant to work on SYNGAP1. One of those years is down, right? And while we hope and expect CHOP will continue to work on SYNGAP1 over the years, the truth is right now they've got an abundance of resources at CHOP to focus on SYNGAP1, and we are building on what they've got there. So we need to build on it now. And we're talking about 3 years of support for these sites, right? So the clock is ticking at CHOP. The pipeline is full. We've got to focus. Let's focus on getting a 3rd site and making the most of it. Now, why do we need a 3rd site? What's going on? Why are we doing a natural history study? I thought we already had a natural history study. Didn't Ingrid Schaffer publish something in 2019 with Vlaskamp? Yes. Didn't Kim Wiltrout publish something just this year based on the citizen data? Yes. Those are important studies. They support each other. They have the same findings. They describe our disease pretty well, but they do not cut it for 2 things. Number 1, picking validated scales that we can use, right? We need a little more work on that. And number 2, serving as a synthetic control arm. What am I talking about? So before I go on, I want to say CHOP, 1 year down. If you listen to the last SYNGAP10 episode 151, you will remember that CHOP has already seen 86 new visits. 86 new patients have gone there, with 10 more scheduled. They've had 19 people come back for a 2nd visit, 4 people come back for a 3rd visit, and they have 22 other follow-ups scheduled. That's an impressive amount of data in 1 year. We need to do this in a focused manner with a large multidisciplinary team looking at our kids now, because we are trying to figure out what to measure in a clinical trial. Remember, SYNGAP1 patients have a highly variable and complex seizure presentation. Start with absence, go to islet myoclonia, tonic-clonic, atonic drops, etc. Sometimes status, God forbid. Right? So we have very tricky patients who all present a little bit differently and change over time. So measuring seizures, which is the standard answer, doesn't work for SYNGAP. We need to measure seizures and what? That's one of the questions we're answering with a prospective natural history study done with the level of rigor we're proposing right now at CHOP, Colorado, and a 3rd site. And if we do it right, and this is something that Vlaskamp definitely doesn't have, is if we do this right, the data can serve as a synthetic control arm. Remember what I said at the top. These are novel genetic therapies that will be delivered by spinal tap into the patients. The last thing I want as a dad is to sign up for a trial that is placebo-controlled. Placebo-controlled means you give half the patients the white pill, you give the other half the patients the white pill. They don't know if their white pill is the real medicine or the placebo. Works fine for small molecules. Here, pop this in your mouth. But we're talking about spinal taps. What we want to understand is, what does a SYNGAP population look like normally? And then let's use that as the placebo arm so we don't have to stick saline in a bunch of kids' spines. That is bonkers. And, by the way, the same time, tie those kids up, because if they're in clinical trial A, they can't take part in clinical trial B. And we're looking forward to a future where there's multiple clinical trials. So let's get that synthetic control arm dialed in, so every single patient who signs up for a trial is getting medicine, and we're learning as much as possible, as fast as possible. Time is brain. So we want to do a natural history study. We want to do it at the best institutions in America. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, world class. Children's Hospital of Colorado, world class. Serves all those 8 states in the mountain region. Whatever third site will be, world class. Why? Are we snobs? Do we only like fancy places? No. 2 reasons to go top shelf. Number 1, we're asking the FDA to use this data to approve how a clinical trial will be designed. The FDA likes top shelf. Number 2, top shelf means they actually know how to handle kids who are this complex. They actually know how to handle kids who are this complex. Most institutions ask any parent, meet our kids, scratch their heads, Google, and then read us stuff back from our own website. Not going to work, guys. We need doctors who are used to these very, very complicated kids with genetic disease. So, PROMISE stands for prospective. I've just talked about that. Multidisciplinary, multi-site study. Why multidisciplinary? What are we talking about there? Multidisciplinary means you go to do the study and you don't just meet a neurologist. You meet a neurologist, psychiatrist, or psychiatrist generally. PT, ST, OT. If you need it, gastrointestinal, our kids have GI issues, sleep doctor, ENT if it's necessary, ortho, all these different specialties. We need as many specialties as possible together on one day seeing our kids. Why? Well, number 1, ask any parent. You need to see all these doctors. And scheduling all these appointments and going and seeing all these doctors and getting referred and having the insurance, it's madness. It's crazy making for families. But number 2, even if you can pull it off, even if you can somehow schedule all these people, see all these people, get insurance approved for all these people, you got to then coordinate. You got to call Dr. A and say, hey, Dr. B wants this medicine and Dr. C would like us to try this. And have you thought, and Dr. D, it doesn't work. You cannot coordinate this. So multidisciplinary is a huge asset. And it's one of the reasons that people keep going back. It's because finally they're getting the level of comprehensive integrated care that we desperately need to take care of our loved ones, right? That's why we need multidisciplinary. So why multi-site? This is a question we get also. What is it about multi-site? CHOP's really good. You keep saying how good CHOP is. CHOP's funded. Let's just let CHOP do this. Okay, good question. Remember the regulators. They have to take the data that comes out of SYNGAP1 PROMISE, and they have to say, for clinical excellence, and they have to say, okay, based on this data, we want you to measure this in a clinical trial, and maybe we're even going to use this data for placebo arm, right? Now, if we bring the FDA or the EMEA or whomever from wherever, Health Canada, I think, is the regulator in Canada. If we bring these different regulatory agencies a bunch of data from one institution, they will probably say, rightly, this is just from one institution. Like, it's great. Maybe it works at CHOP, but you're now going to do a trial at multiple sites and you're telling us that all these other sites can do exactly what CHOP did. We don't believe it. And then it's back to the drawing board. Whereas, if we say, hey, this was the protocol we followed it at CHOP, we followed it at Colorado, we followed it at Third Site, and they all got good data, and this is how it worked, then they know that the protocol we're following and the things we're testing are replicable. So it's not 3 sites. The primary reason for 3 sites is replicability, right? Now, accessibility is not the goal, but I have to tell you, accessibility is important, right? There are many SYNGAP families who don't fly. And there's the vast majority of SYNGAPians don't fly. Why don't they fly? Have you met a SYNGAPian, right? Sometimes they lose it. Sometimes things that we don't even understand trigger them. Sometimes it's too much for them. And sometimes they can lash out. And you do not want to be at 30,000 feet with a SYNGAPian who's having a bad day. It doesn't work. Right? So you either medicate them heavily before you put them on the plane, and that doesn't necessarily bode well if you're going to go then test them for a natural history study, or you just don't fly. And I think that's where a lot of our families find themselves, which is heartbreaking all by itself. So instead of asking all of our West Coast and mountain region families to fly to CHOP, we could now say go to Colorado and or go to whatever third site will be, right? The other reason to invest in multiple sites is what is a clinical trial site today is a place that knows and understands syngapians. The doctor and the kids know each other. The team understands the disease. They know what kind of supports we need. They can anticipate the kind of challenges we're going to have, the need for feeding bag support, the need for GI support, the need for different kinds of whatever it takes to handle our kids. So the clinical trial sites of today become the places tomorrow where we actually stick the needles into the spines and we deliver the medicine. CHOP has done this for many institutions. Scott Demarest at Colorado was the guy who did this for Millicent, which is the famous N of 1 therapy that was given to beautiful little Milla for Batten's disease. And, wherever third site, one of the places we're looking at for third site is Stanford. Stanford has delivered many NGLY1 gene therapies, multiple times. Frankly, 3 sites is just the beginning. Once industry starts funding these sites because they're delivering medicine and investing more and more in SYNGAP work, we expect this to be self-sustaining. Frankly, I'd like there to be 3, 4, or 5 sites. If you look at STAR for SYNGAP STXBP1 or the Angelman Network, both of them started with 4 sites. But we are, just simply from a cost management point of view, we're saying 3 is bare minimum, right? So let's get site 3 stood up. That's why 3 sites. Now, a couple of our donors, especially the people we've hit up last year and we hit up the year before, being like, wow, things are moving really fast. 2 years ago, you were talking about basic science. Last year, you were talking about small molecules. We're still going to be talking about small molecules, by the way. Now you're talking about clinical trials. What's going on? Why are you moving so fast? Because we can. Time is brain. Every day that goes by, every syngapian's brain is being built with not enough SYNGAP1 protein, SYNGAP protein. And as a result of that, they suffer from a litany of maladies that I'm not going to recite right now. Right? Time is brain. And if we can move fast, we must. Right? So, and that's the beauty of being alive today in 2024. Things are actually possible right now. But we're not making this up, guys. We're following a well-trodden path. Look at spinal muscular atrophy. The team at Stoke started with spinal muscular atrophy, and they delivered that drug, and it was quasi-miraculous. That team went on to found Stoke Therapeutics, and guess what they're doing? They're working on Dravet. And what have they done with Dravet? They funded a natural history study because the data wasn't good enough. There goes 2 years. And now they're dosing patients. And they're seeing remarkable results, the kind that we want to see for SYNGAP1. Guess what Dravet is going to work on in the brain after Dravet? Guess what Stoke's going to work on in the brain after Dravet? SYNGAP1, we're next on their pipe. Same answer for Angelman and Rett, and most recently SCN2A, due to the incredible work at Praxis. So we are moving fast because people have shown us what to do, the order in which to do it. We are copying the best of the best, and we are doing our damnedest to help our children, right? Another question we got from somebody, because basically our argument boils down to we have to do this natural history study because we need to de-risk SYNGAP1 so the industry can get through trials as fast as possible. And one of our potential donors said to us, really? You guys only have 1,500 patients around the world, 400 found in the US. Does industry really care? Almost a fair question. Yes, they care, right? We are at the industry is building up the ability to treat rare genetic neurological. I'm not even going to say rare. We're rare because our numbers are low. Our numbers are low not because our numbers are low, but because we're underdiagnosed. So let me just say, industry is working on tools to address genetic diseases, right? And they're going to move as fast as possible through what they can move through. They're going to have successes and they're going to keep building, right? So even though our market size right now is identified and known by SRF, 1,500 worldwide, 400 plus in the US. The truth is there's hundreds of people in the US who SRF doesn't know about directly, right? And I know this because if you type our ICD-10 code into the billing systems, you find 500 plus patients out the door. Go look at Jillian McKee's last preprint. But also, for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to describe right now, we know from genetic modeling that there are thousands more syngapians out there. We also know this from doing cohort studies on patients with ID. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. Punchline is, industry believes, as do we, that there are thousands of syngapians, not hundreds. And they also believe, and we are working with them on this, that there are ways to find more and more patients. Again, this takes time and money, and we're working on it. Also, there's 2 other reasons why SYNGAP. Well, probably 3 other reasons. Reason number 1, I got to write one of these down. Reason number 1, there's 10 companies in our pipeline, not 1. I'm not doing this to help 1 company. We're doing this to help multiple companies. And they're looking at each other, and the people at Stoke are looking at the people at Praxis. They're like, they're pretty smart. They're working on saying, maybe we should. And then there's people at Ionis, and there's people at Regel, and there's people at Tevard, and they're all like, well, yeah, everyone's talking about SYNGAP. There's maybe Mike's right. Maybe there are. Yeah, you're right. I am right. There are thousands of us. And industry is checking with each other. They all know each other, these guys. And they're saying, yeah, SYNGAP1's a big market. We got to go after it. So number one, industry does care. They believe in the market size. Number two, SYNGAP was identified in 1998 by Rick Huganier, first patient in 2009. The amount of basic science research, Rick Huganier, people at the bench, playing with cell lines in mice, and the amount of clinical research, human research, Flaskamp, Waltrout, et cetera, is pretty substantial for SYNGAP1 as compared to the hundreds of other genetic rare diseases. I mean, there's so many families and patients and moms and dads who call me like every couple of weeks and they say, our kid was just diagnosed with whatever, ABC123 and blah, 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 autism, epilepsy, blah, 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 bad. And there's 2 researchers and what do we do next? There's hundreds of groups out there, but they have very little scientific and clinical research. We have, relatively speaking, it's never enough for us, but relatively speaking, we have enough that gives industry confidence that they can go after this disease. And frankly, at the genetics level, the molecular biology, we are relatively straightforward. I bite my tongue when I say that because there's a lot of edge cases, but at the simplest level, we are a haploinsufficiency. 2 copies of every gene we all have, one from mom, one from dad. In the case of our patients, one of them works, one of them doesn't. If both of them didn't, they'd be dead. If one of them works, one of them doesn't. And that means, and the body needs both of them to work to have enough protein product. So if we can just make the good copy work harder, solves the problem. Pretty simple. There are other diseases where one of them doesn't, one of them works too much, there's misfold, it's complicated. But the punchline is, as a haploinsufficiency, we are relatively tractable and industry has confidence that they can go after us. So does industry care? Yes. Are they ready, willing, and able to jump in? Yes. So why don't we just ask them to fund all these sites? Good luck with that, right? I got 10 people who have SYNGAP on their pipeline, getting all of them in a room and getting them to write checks, all their different approvals and processes, not to mention then you create an IP headache. We want to get industry to support this, but we need to start by building this foundation with the 3 sites. Again, CHOP is funded. Thank you, donor. Colorado is funded. Thank you, SRF, and our own donor. Thank you I cannot thank that person enough. Now it is time to fund 3rd site. And then the next question I get from donors: this kind of feels expensive. $500,000 for one institution. Are you sure that you're getting a good deal? Is this expensive? No, this is not expensive. This is a screaming deal. This is a screaming deal. Let me tell you the ways in which this is a screaming deal. Number one, if CHOP hadn't built the team, designed the study, had the IRB, validated that this was possible, already seen 86 plus patients, we would have to go through all that. The startup, the analysis, the doctor time, the blah, 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 all done. Once done, we then need to build a team and a tool to collect the data between different sites in one place and pay someone to manage that. Not cheap, also done at CHOP, right? So we have the infrastructure to build a multi-site study already in place at CHOP, cost us $0. Part of this work is to both look at clinical measures and patient-reported measures. That opens up a whole other headache. Getting patients to consent, collecting different surveys from patients, pulling that data up, sharing it to doctors at different sites, sharing it back to CHOP, cross-correlating the data reported by patients with the data collected by doctors. If you're having a headache listening to this, good job. You understand how complicated it is. Guess what? Tool is built. Organization is called RareX. RareX is already working on STXBP1, already working with CHOP and Colorado on a separate disease, ready to scale that up and work on it for SYNGAP. There is some cost involved in that, but relative to what we're getting, it's a reasonable price. And let me tell you something, if we had to build it ourselves, it would be at $0, right? I have watched the evolution of RareX over the years. It is a strong team who've done a lot of work. If you want to get a splitting headache, go ahead and talk about patient privacy and consents and how you're going to share data between institutions through a patient advocacy group. Nightmare. Is this expensive? No, it is the most reasonable cost we can find for the quality of people we are working with. We are doing so well. Now, what this question I struggle with, frankly, but someone did say, this was a relative, they said, why should we really bother? Like, is this going to work? Should I really bother? First of all, yes, you should bother, right? For the first time in human history, we have the ability to go after rare genetic disease. We have young children who have a rare genetic disease, and thank God, this disease does not kill people. It just causes them incredible suffering and places a massive burden on their families for their entire lives. So I don't care if your SYNGAPian is 2, 10, 14, or 32. The work we're doing couldn't change the course of the rest of their lives. And when you think about it like that, we almost have an ethical obligation. I don't want to say ethical, but I do feel it. If we don't do this, it's shame on us. And this is the moment for SYNGAP1. Right now, there is this activity at CHOP. Right now, we are on 10 pipelines, right? Companies can put things on pipelines. They can also take things off, right? The next biotech boom, that 10 might become 5. Right now, we have industry interest. We have CHOP in place, and the iron is hot, right? So this is the time for SYNGAP. We have to strike now. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of other rare disease groups out there. And there's precious few world-class institutions who know how to take care of these incredibly complicated kids with rare genetic diseases. Right now, we have the ability to get on the dance cards of these institutions. That's not going to last forever. If we don't strike now, I don't know when we can strike again. It's a little bit of a dark thought, but life isn't always sunshine and roses. And if not us, who? Right? That is the point. People keep calling me and they're like, Mike, how did you raise so much money for SRF? And I'm like, well, it either comes from families or families have asked. They're like, no, we are rare disease. We are ultra rare disease patients, guys. Unless you are related to a SYNGAPian or a friend of someone related to a SYNGAPian, you don't care. It's just that simple. We are not getting money from strangers, folks. We are getting money from people related to SYNGAPians or people who know people who are related to SYNGAPians, and we say, please help us help our children. That's it. So why bother help? Because if we don't, no one will. It's that simple. And if you're related to a SYNGAPian, no matter how close or how far, trust me on this one, the more work we do now, the easier our future is. I have 2 sons. Tony is sick with SYNGAP. John is not. But unfortunately, none of us are getting out of here alive, right? So when I die, I want to be looking at John on my deathbed and be like, hey, have fun. Good luck taking care of brother. And have him be like, thanks for all you did. Now with these medicines and these doctors, I know that I can take care of brother and oversee his care, and it's going to be okay. What I don't want is my son looking at me and being like, God damn it, you're dying, and now I got to deal with Tony, and I have no idea what to do because there aren't any medicines, there aren't enough doctors, and it's still a cluster. That's what keeps me up at night. So I'm not working like hell on this for the fun of it. I'm working like hell on this because I want both of my sons to have the best lives they can possibly have. And that requires that we do as much as we can while we are vertical to invest in and improve the quality of clinical care and the medicines available for SYNGAPians, period, end of thought. Last question, what can I do? This is what you should be asking right now. Donate to the Coast2Coast Challenge. Raise money for the Coast2Coast Challenge. Go to syngap.funds/C2C, letter C, number 2, letter C. Start a team or invest. We've got 2 teams. We've got an East team led by Suzanne, a West team led by me. Let's raise some money, people. At the minimum, I want to hit $500,000 by the end of the year. Honestly, I'd like to clear $1 million because then when we fund the promise, we can move on to small molecules and biomarker, other exciting things. But promise has to be our priority, guys. If you're a family that is given to SRF, thank you. What I'm asking you to do now in 2024 is give the biggest gift you've ever given. We are at a time where there's so much opportunity to improve the future for SYNGAPians. We have to do this. Donations to date have raised from $25 to $25,000. Every dollar matters. It all adds up. You gotta ask. Don't just forward this video to people and be like, hey, check this out. Write them a letter and say, please consider supporting the SYNGAP Research Fund. I know this organization. I trust this organization. They are working like crazy. Their audited financials are on their website. Check them out. We need to help my beloved Syngapian, insert name here. Please donate as much as you reasonably can. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting the Coast to Coast Challenge. Have a great week.